Welcome back to the Rules of Engagement. We talked about the first opening sequences of game number 2 between Leenock and Innovation. Now let's jump into the second part of that same game. We're going to start about halfway into the game and talk about how to position your forces as a Zerg player and kind of the lulls of the game. So you can set yourself up to basically be in a good position when the action really starts happening. We're going to talk about how to deal with Terran mid-game aggression. Then we're going to talk about late-game Terran drop play. And if you're a Terran player, how to execute it and to benefit as much as possible from said late-game drop play. We're jumping into this game that we're just going over at the 15-minute mark. It may look pretty familiar. Innovation has got himself. He's got his defenses set up. His 2-2 is finishing up. He's confident that the Mutas counterattack won't be that big of a deal, so he's starting to ready to move out. And up till now, there's been a little bit of a lull in the action, and this is where, as a Zerg player, you have to know how to position your forces. So if we look at what Leenock's doing, right, we'll see a couple things. Is one, he's got a few units back here. This is just his rally units, right? We notice that's why the overlords are there. All his rally points are in this section, so he knows where to find units when he wants some extra units. He has Mutas lurking around to threaten this side. The reason the Mutas are lurking over here in this zone instead of on a top is because this way they're best positioned to intercept the scary drops, the ones that can hit his base very fast and you won't have much reaction time. If he sees a drop coming across the top, he has plenty of time to get his Mutas up and over. But if he was up here and he saw a drop coming across the bottom, he'd be in a much harder position to get back all the way to his main in time before too much damage is done. The other thing he wants to do is he wants to keep some squad of units, speedings and baitings, over here. Not only to make it harder to take this fourth base for the Terran player, but also to be able to launch potential counterattacks. So as soon as he thinks the Terran player might be moving out, which happened as soon as he lost control of this watchtower, he strikes in with the counterattacks, right? He sends in Mutas here, and the speeding baiting force is launched here. And even if he did not want to launch a counterattack, he still wants to have this army here, because if he wants to fight the army, as the army moves out, he can set up a flank, right? So let's actually just talk about it on the big map for a second here real quick. So the idea of a Zerg player behind you have a squad of units right here, right? Is if your opponent, you can either counterattack here, right? Or if your opponent sends their army out to attack you, you have the option to send this force along the big side, and you can attack here along with your rally troops attacking here, and you can kind of do a nice little sandwich on the Terran army as they move out. So position your forces over here at the top left allows you to launch a counterattack, and it also allows you to sandwich and flank their army if you want to go for an army crush maneuver as well. So always a good idea to have your army positioned that way. The other thing we're going to talk about is when he does the counterattack, what do you look for? Well, killing a fourth command center is always good, but you're looking to keep the Terran back, and so Leenock wants a chance to equalize the upgrades. He needs a few more seconds to equalize those upgrades. He wants to keep the Terran back until those happen, as well as buying enough time to get his high-tech out in play. So he kills the command center, kills a bunch of SCVs, gets some damage done, then gets out of there. Now it's at the stage where he's still the Terran mid-game aggression, but eventually he's going to have to deal with it. So, as a Zerg player, when you're facing these big Terran armies that are moving out across the map, what you want to do is you need to actually crush the whole army, right? You can annoy it, you can pick at it, but if you keep doing small trades, what's going to happen is the threat will stay there. If you do you trade some units, what happens? Well, you both have to keep replenishing units. They still have that force there, so you don't have a chance to really get your tech into play. If you look at the economy, even if Zerg has more workers than Terran, in this game, in fact, Leenock actually has equal workers. But even if you have 10 more workers than them, you're still going to have less economy because, first of all, Terran would normally have more than 67. He just lost some SCV, so if you look at the production tab, he's going to be replacing those momentarily. So Terran's going to be at roughly the same workers as Zerg. Either you're both at 80 or both at 60, whatever it is. Roughly similar worker counts. And Terran's going to have more economy because of mules. So as a Zerg player, you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you're trading an army and then you both have to rebuild it. Then you're trading it again because Terran will win that war of attrition due to higher economy. What you want to do as Zerg player is crush an entire force here. If you can crush this whole force entirely, you know that it's going to be about 2 minutes before Terran can remake that entire force, because even though they have a lot of income, they don't have a lot of production. And in those 2 minutes, you can build your Ultras Cavern. You can build a set of infestors that take a minute to build and a little more time to get their energy. You can get out those high-tech units that take some time, but once they're out, are very, very effective. So the Zerg player, you want to crush the whole army. the best way to do this is flanking. So if you're a Zerg player, you see this army being pushed out. Yes, you want to buy a little time to get your extra infestors out. You can try to feint at them, and maybe you can kill. Actually, this trade isn't bad, right? He actually got 3 mines and some bio, lost some speed and banings. It wasn't a great trade, but it wasn't a terrible trade either, right? But any trade where you don't crush your whole army is going to end up being bad because you're always going to be behind economically. So right here, ideally what you want to have happen, you want to take the time to grab some of your units and send them around their back and try to sandwich them from both sides. Because if you look at this army right here, what happens when actually, let's look at this from the all view, right? There's these mines back here, right? So if you're a Zerg player and you just hit the Spy army, what's going to happen? This Spy army is going to immediately just retreat back this way. It's going to kite backwards. And as your Zerg army pursues it, you're going to have the hard time because if you pursue it with a small amount of Zerglings, the Bio won't retreat. It'll kill them. If you send a large pack of Banelings, a ton of Zerglings after it, what's going to happen? They're going to back up. The Widow Mines are going to blow up your large packs of units. You're going to be in big, big trouble. So you don't want to attack from one direction. What you want to do ideally as a Zerg player, if you can, you want to cut the Terran player off. So you don't want to just have these units attacking here. You can have half as many units here, and it'll still be okay if you have another units coming in from the back and sandwiching a Terran player. If you can get that full sandwich action going, the Terran player can't kite backwards. If they're not kiting backwards, Widow Mines will be splashing their own units because your Zerglings will be in direct contact with them. Not to mention the fact that your Zerglings will be constantly attacking. The Banelings will get connections. It'll go much better for you. So you really want to squash your whole Terran army to get the breathing room to tech the hive. And to squash your whole Terran army as a Zerg player, you need to get that flanking action. If you can't get it set up, what happens is this direct attack right here. Terran player kites backwards, the Widow Mines burrow, and you've got to back away, right? And then right now is when, ideally, you backed away, you want to set up the flank, right? So ideally, you're sending some units over the top, getting set up. Because if you don't crush this army, it's still out there. And when it's still out there, now all of a sudden, when they launch these drops across the bottom, and now you got to deal with that. But while you're dealing with that, the army is still out there killing you. And the Terran army out on the map is something that makes you in a very uncomfortable position. Remember, Leenock's at this place where he wants to be able to produce infestors. He's got a couple out already. He's got 3 out. He wants to get some more of those. He wants to build his Ultras Cavern. He wants to set up a bunch of Spine Crawlers to defend against drops. But if this Terran army's out here, he has to spend all his resources just trying to crank out units to keep dealing with this. And the only way he can really stop this is by smashing the whole army, which ideally he needs that flank to do, or else the army can send little squads everywhere and kind of slowly pick away at him. Eventually, what's going to happen is he's going to get angry and try to attack him, but the longer this army is a threat, the longer before Leenock can activate his high-tech, scary units. So this is the point of the game where now, he's stuck in this linear fight. A linear fight, maybe you can do okay, but again, the Widow Mines can force you back. The army is still a threat, and while the army is a threat, what's happening? You're not able to deal with these drops because you're too busy trying to, play cat and mouse with the Terran army. Eventually, even if you have overwhelming numbers, if you don't get the flank, especially with the speed upgrade on the Medivacs, Terran can retreat, meet up with reinforcements, and now the army's even scarier, and you never really took that big chunk out of it that you wanted to take out. So now we're getting into the later parts of the game. And we can see here, Innovation's been doing some drop play, Leenock's been dealing with it. And one thing I should mention about late-game Terran drop play is there's a good general rule. Remember how we've been talking about how it's very hard for Zerg if the Terran army is always alive, basically, and it's always a threat, because the Zerg always has to monitor that threat, and it's much harder for them to really get the bank to build up a lot of Ultras like they want to do. So if you want to keep that threat as big as possible, as a general rule, when you launch your dropships, launch them using your rallied units, using your reserves over here. And the reason why is because sometimes you can launch a small medevac if your army's here and you want to attack a place that's very close to your army, but you want to keep this army as big of a threat as possible so the Zerg's as distracted as possible up here. If your army gets crushed, you need to reinforce it, but as you reinforce it, you want to keep your main army as big of a threat as possible, and to do that, you don't want to load up any of these units in drops. If it's a small army like this, it's not, if you segmented like these units out of it, the rest of the army wouldn't be that scary. A few Demilis alone could clean it up. A small group of Speedians could clean it up. the army would be reduced to the same threat level as a drop, which means a Zerg player would not have to concentrate their forces. If a Zerg player does not have to concentrate their forces, that means they can spread out and defend drops. So while you're pressuring with your army from one direction, back here, this army, you might want to reinforce some of it, and you load up using these units, right? You don't load up your active army to drops and run around to try to drop, because a Zerg player can monitor that. They can keep track of it. They're going to know you're dropping because they're going to know where your active army is. So when you launch these drops, you use your rallied reinforcements. Right, they might see with the overlords, but even if they notice it, they're going to have a hard time because they're busy dealing with their active army, which, of course, is the main threat striking from their front. So anytime you load up those drops, as much as possible, try not to diminish your active army when you're utilizing the drop play. You want your active army to be a threat, so they put all their units up here. All the units are up there. They're going to have a much harder time defending the drop down here. They have a much harder time defending the drop over here. If you spread your active army too small, like right now, the active army is too small. All of a sudden, a Zerg player can split units in multiple directions. I mean, he can have speedings here. He should have speedings down the bottom. Right now, he's running short units, and that's just because Innovation's been playing an absolutely amazing game. So going forward here, again, Innovation keeping the threat with the main army strong to keep the Zerg have to keep their presence up here. When the main army threat is active, that's when you take the time to potentially either load up units here. Exactly, you load up your reinforcements and send them out, or you can just try to reinforce the main army. Again, loading from the reinforcements. Always load from the reinforcements. Try not to diminish your main army too much so that the Zerg player still has to deal with that threat, the main threat, straight from their front door. So going forward, we can see here, Innovation's basically being able to keep Leenock pinned back. And now he's taking the 4th base. His 5th base is being taken. And Leenock has never been able to transition to the Mass Infestor Ultras combo he wants. He's trying to do it now with 5 more Infestors being produced. But there's too much of an army in the front, and the mines are blowing up. And now this is at the point where even if he gets these Infestors out, if you look at his speeding count, is down to 10. Speeding count of 10, he can no longer handle these drops because speedings are his only way to really defend these drops. Infestors alone, they're great in the big engagement. In a drop play, not so great. And so he has to send Ultras back. And if the Ultras are back defending the drop, there's not going to be much to defend the front attack. Well, in this case, it's clearing up creep, but if there was a base there that would have died, the front attack here is very hard to defend when the Ultras are busy trying to defend all these drops. And eventually, you get to the point where with 5 bases, you spread your speeding count out too small. They all have to be in one place. If they're all in one place, that's where all of a sudden you can bring all your Widow Mines forward. If all the Ultras are in one place, the Widow Mines are going to really weaken these Ultras to the point where your Bioforce can easily finish them off. Leenock realizes he's going to lose that, types GG, and Innovation goes on to win. So the cool things there to take from that game is, number 1, if you're a Zerg player, if you're playing low upgrades, low econ, Mulus play, make sure to set up Bane landmines so that if they push out with a large force, you can defeat it without having to cripple your... What you're trying to do is you're trying to grow your economy now because you didn't grow in the early game. And you can't afford to produce the army to defeat them straight up, so you got to use those Bane landmines. If you're a Terran player and you want to utilize drop play can be fun, but don't take too many forces out of your main army. Not only because you don't have your main army absolutely annihilated by the Zerg army, but you also want to make sure that the Zerg has to keep most of their attention on the front, and that'll make your drops much more likely to succeed. Also, with a Zerg player, remember to work those counterattacks and try to utilize map control to the best of your ability. This wraps up Leenock vs. Innovation Game 2. At this point, Innovation's up 2-0 in the series. We'll take a short break, and then go on to analyze Game number 3.